So now we're going to shift gears a little bit to focus for the rest of the afternoon, which will rattle by very quickly on what's next. So we're looking at practical solutions and actions to drive change in the training and skills sector. We have Mark Harriott joining us, Executive Branch Manager of Skills Canberra. Come on up to the stage. Commissioner Cameron Baker, Chair of the South Australian Skills Commission. Natalie Turmine is with us. She's the CEO of Service and Creative Skills Australia, a joint JSC. Danica Yanchenko is the Acting First Assistant Secretary of the Department of Employment and Workplace Relations, and Patrick Kidd is going to co-moderate the panel with me. Please welcome everyone. I think, Patrick, we should let the states and territories rip, don't you?
100%.
Okay, so let's start with you, Mark. I think what we want to do is just do a little consideration of everything that's happening in this area of skills at the moment from your point of view, because it does seem, as Barney Glover was saying, that while there's an enormous amount to do, we have been playing catch-up and an enormous amount's going on. So just start from your perspective of saying what you think is going on in this moment of sort of flowering opportunity.
No worries, thank you, and g'day all. I suppose, there's so much going on at the moment, and listening to all this awesome stuff about AI and where to go to is so exciting. I think when you think about the rest of the vet sector and higher ed, it's also one of the biggest turning points that I've seen in education, and it's just so exciting to be a part of. Speaking from the vet perspective, there are so many projects going on behind the scenes that I think we need to just make sure we're aware of. For our RTOs, and a lot of our RTOs being small businesses themselves, and also our TAFEs, there's all the work going on around qualification reform, which is having massive impacts on training package development, but then obviously transition of qualifications, the impost, the cost, all those sorts of things. There's the new standards that have just come out for RTOs from the 1st of July, so that's another impact on our RTOs. The other things going on, there's the National Skills Agreement that's been mentioned a few times today. Under the National Skills Agreement, there's 7 policy initiatives that the jurisdictions are mostly signing up for. Some of those policy initiatives, like the Vet Data Streamlining Project, that's another one that has a massive impact on the whole vet sector, but also on our little RTOs as well. So there's a massive amount of change currently happening. And then we've got the Jobs and Skills Councils, and the Jobs and Skills Councils have been awesome to work with so far. My only problem is that there's 10 of them, and there's one of me. So that's been the biggest challenge, that everyone is doing this awesome stuff. We've heard about all the great stuff today about what FSO is doing, but I suppose I know from an ACT perspective, having a pretty small team, that when you get all 10 of them doing training package development or releasing awesome programs and initiatives, for us, it's just trying to make sure that we can try and throw the resources at it to make sure it's actually meaningful and we can make good progress on it. I suppose for me, there was a conversation before about levers, and so I suppose from the government perspective, it's really about, with all this change going on, with the introduction of AI, with training packages that we spoke about earlier, it's really about, well, how do I, as government, try and get the settings right for the learner, and also industry and our RTOs as well. So it's trying to balance those things out together. And so that's the challenge, but it's also a really good opportunity there as well.
And so how do you find, I mean, this is the pointy end of the day, how do you prioritise what you're doing amidst all of that reform? How do you prioritise?
Dog paddle. Look, that is the challenge. And I suppose, we need to support a system and make sure it's not breaking. And so, that support for our RTOs, we had Felix. We've got Iteca here today. So our private RTOs, our small RTOs, it's making sure we're supporting them while they're going through so much change as well. But that change is also flowing through our TAFEs and that as well. So it's making sure that we're setting the foundations so they can engage with industry and they can train the people, so industry have that pipeline of workers coming through and they can do that part, that innovation part.
So it's as much maintaining the pace of change and keeping an eye on what is changing and ensuring that it's doing what you would need it to do, rather than being at a point of having to initiate a whole lot of change. It's just bedding down that change.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, you know, things have been static for a while in the vet sector, and, you know, I feel like we're finally moving in the right direction. Like the qualification reform was a really good look at, you know, some changes that can actually be made. Some changes have been made, but I think there are still more to come and more conversations to have in that regard. But at least there is some really good progress happening.
Patrick, I wonder how you're coming down on all of this, because I feel like the job at FSO is to be impatient. I think that's the useful contribution that you're making, is to be impatient for change. With all of what's going on, what do you see as, in terms of that question, what's next and priorities, what mode are we in? Are we in bedding down all of this change that was made in the last term of Labor government, which is an awful lot of catch-up, as Mark said, or should we be anxious for the next thing?
I think like all the jobs and skills councils, we are different and we have different pressures and we have different drivers that sort of take us forwards over time. And I think when I reflect on what we have to look at from a future skills organisation's perspective is sort of like there's a million things that you might do.
Yep.
And like you heard it all this morning. And so the hardest thing is like to be clear about what you're going to do. And I think in many respects, it's the conversation with industry about trying to really be clear about what are the most important things. And then how do we then consistently get in behind that so that we're saying the same thing? You know, so often I think industry and the training sector commits fratricide, as we say the same thing, but we say it differently. And so we're not sending a clear message to government about what we need to do. And you heard it this morning. So, like, if we need to do things differently, if we need to make sure that parts of the system are able to move quicker than other parts of the system, then we all need to say that. Big companies, small companies, peak bodies and associations, but we need to be consistent about our messaging. And our job as a Jobs and Skills Council is almost to convene and to try to bring together the right stakeholders so that we can actually move forwards by working with educators, by working with government, by working with industry. And our job is to try and provide a simple path that enables us to move forwards. It almost doesn't matter what you do, as long as you do something.
Cam, South Australians are more evolved than the rest of us in the Federation. Just ask them, they'll tell you. And so what do you chafe against in terms of the pace of change?
We speak proper too.
Yeah.
It's all about grants. And just to disclose, I'm not actually originally from South Australia, so I just want to get that glass jaw out there. In South Australia, within our system, we're chafing against quite a bit at the moment. So you've heard a couple of examples this morning from the sessions around quite a lot of our pilot project activity. And I guess the chafing bit is now occurring because we want to progress these pilot processes beyond pilot into mainstream national, have them embraced in other jurisdictions, and we're finding some national barriers to that. I think if we look at the training package design, development and maintenance process, that's something that has frustrated me for quite some time. I've worked in multiple jurisdictions in similar roles as a senior official. I've worked in the old Skills Council model as well. There's 7 steps required in the current interim training package design, development and maintenance process to actually move a product forward to endorsement. All state and territory ministers need to sign off on training package product. I mean, we really got to start talking about this and try and find some compromise in the system around getting good ideas to market sooner, because we've got the industry engagement mechanisms there through the Jobs and Skills Councils. We've got them there at the state and territory level through our own respective engagement models. We're dealing with the peaks around implementation and delivery issues, but we still can't get the national training standard updated in time. And I do want to share a couple of examples with you. This is why I brought the iPad up, because I don't want to be misquoted. Early childhood education and care is a prime example of something that's not only in the media at the moment, but an issue for all states and territories and concern. So it's taken 14 months to change the diploma, to change the nesting relationship between the Cert 3 and the diploma. So that project was initiated in June in 2024. Step 4 was assessed in February 2025, and we're now at step 7, so response is requested by the 31st of July. So, geez, I hope we did it, Ruth, because it's August. But this issue around workload too for the states and territories around jumping through these particular hoops. So as a senior skills official for South Australia and as a skills commissioner, why can't I say, well, Patrick brings a great idea to me. It's validated by my industry engagement framework, so my industry skills council. And I say to Patrick, well, your product will work in my state and it will result in the employment of, say, 10 trainees. So why can't I say as South Australia to the Commonwealth, South Australia conditionally endorses this product. We will pilot it in South Australia and we will evaluate it, and then all other states and territories can come on board with that piloting process, or they can wait to see whether or not I fail. So I think we need to start looking at more of an iterative endorsement process that keeps up with states and territories that are involving in other sector areas. So we're not all the same. That's why we have the federated model. We don't all have the same economic drivers, but we are strong in certain economic areas, and there are central focal points around those economic areas in a lot of states and territories. So I think the Commonwealth needs to let us take on a bit of risk, because if we're prepared to fund it, sure,
and fail.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess that's the other issue around having 8 jurisdictions signed off on the product as well. You've got to remember that that's what a competency standard is. It's 8 jurisdictions saying that is the bare minimum we're prepared to accept. So when you talk about competency, you're not talking about proficiency, and you're not talking about elevating that competency standard. That's the compromise that you're looking at. So PK, I've taken the bait, so I know you want to respond.
Look, I think what you're seeing here, playing out on the stage is the absolute complexity of this system. Like you've heard from educators, you've heard from industry, and what you've got here is state government, and we've got federal government. And all of these parts of the system have to come together. And that in itself is a challenge. And I sort of want to go to Nat next, actually, and sort of ask her about where she sits from her perspective and the sort of barriers that you've got to overcome, and the role that you play in terms of your JSC around retail and its fundamental importance to the economy in terms of getting people moving. It's not just about retail. It serves a real function in our community. Get your sense as to really what you're trying to work your way through.
Yeah, thanks, PK. I think it was interesting. I've jotted down quite a lot of things today from the common themes. And as PK said, all the Jobs and Skills Councils do have different challenges. We look after all the creative and service industries, so that's the entire art sector, which there's about 30 industries just under that. But you've then got personal services, tourism, hospitality, and retail. And these are industries where you don't necessarily need a qualification to do the job. You don't need a Cert 3 in hospitality to work in hospitality. You don't need a Cert 3 in retail to work in retail. And I think we're looking at the moment, our training and our enrolments across our vet quals are dropping substantially because of that. At the moment, our tourism and hospitality training, so those sort of qualifications have dropped in commencements by 60% since 2016. So vet qualifications are just not being valued by our sector. And in fact, a lot of our retail sector is saying they don't want people to do it. So if I have a look at, today we've heard a number of things here that I've jotted down, like we have heard you don't necessarily need qualifications all the time, but you do need skills. But not having those skills, what we're seeing in our sectors, it means people aren't advancing their careers. We've got massive leadership shortages. People see our industries as like just entry-level jobs. They don't see that they're multi-billion-dollar industries. So we've got massive management and leadership shortages. We've got massive digital skills shortages, especially in tourism and hospitality. There is so much AI and technology in those spaces, but the small businesses don't have that capability. What we're seeing is that industry wants and needs training, but they're not necessarily leaning in on the vet sector for it. We're seeing that industry associations and large businesses are taking up the slack. We're also seeing that a lot of the peak bodies are doing a lot of that training for them.
And is
as well
there
too.
anything wrong with that?
Well, it's not being recognised. So we do have a bunch of workers out there in the industry that do have skills, but if we don't have something like for example, if we've got to get this skills taxonomy right, so what is the definition of a skill, so that we can define that first. But we've very much been looking at how do we then look at the skills passport, and we need to reinvigorate that conversation, because for some industries we actually do need that.
Yes.
We need some way to recognise what is a formal skill, a skill that they've got at a workplace, and there is a lot of talk around productivity and a call on industry to start stepping up and doing more training. But how do you record that, and how do you recognise that? If I look at Kmart, for instance, does all their own training internally, which is great for Kmart. They train everyone in the Kmart way. But when a person leaves Kmart, they've got nothing on a piece of paper to show what their skills are. So, yeah, I think it is important.
Yeah, yeah, and that's something that the union movement, and certainly Brendan O'Connor was concerned about, is this is personal enrichment and professional development for the individual, and how do you reflect that? Because they did get it, even if, there's no tattoo to prove they have. Danica, I'm interested in, again, coming to this issue of pace and how we can make federalism work a little better, because there are opportunities in the multitude of states and territories. What did you think of Cam's suggestion?
Sounds like Cam's going to solve federalism. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, look, I think... Yeah, right. Look, I think that from the Commonwealth's perspective, like, we are open to any and all ideas, and I think one of the challenges for the Commonwealth in this space particularly is that we don't have all the answers. We don't know what the solutions are. The people in this room are the people who know what the answers are and what the solutions are. So the Jobs and Skills Councils, sandwiched between two CEOs, are doing some really important things, like, right across the economy. And I think we need to let that and all of the things that Mark and various others have listed today that are happening in the system wash through. I think the other thing to say is that, yes, the system is slow and clunky in some respects, but in other respects, there is a fair bit of room to move within the system. And I think the accelerator that we talked about earlier and a range of other pilots and opportunities that have been talked about today are great examples of what you can do if you think a little bit differently and think about what is possible within the frame that we do have. On sort of some of the challenges that Cameron sort of identified, we do have expectations from ministers that they'll be involved in particular, or at a particular sort of level of the conversation. So that's a thing that we need to make sure that we deliver as public servants for them. But within that, thinking about the opportunities, there's probably opportunities to do it a little bit differently. So absolutely open to a conversation about that. I think we've already started with our state and territory colleagues, and we can continue that moving forward.
If I may, if we were to do like one thing, like Jobs and Skills Councils and state governments and federal governments, we do one thing that's going to make a difference this year, next 12 months, what would that be?
I could do a whole TED talk on that, PK.
Brilliant. Okay, excellent.
No, I think, and I'm going to be selfish here and talk about our JSC for a second, because qualification reform for us is going to be the key enabler for our industries. Our industries are wanting short, sharp, flexible training. They're wanting micro-credentials. They're wanting skill sets. If I pick on retail, for instance, at the moment, so at the moment in the retail sector, SDA released a survey recently that shows that 87% of retail workers have had some form of customer aggression, whether it's verbal, physical, or sexual, in the last 12 months, right? So we're doing a review on that. Like, how can we better train up the workforce and the leaders in the retail sector? Now, we could embed that training into the retail certificate, but as I said before, no one's doing the retail certificate. Why don't we look at making a standalone skill set that not only it can be generic, contextualised of course, but generic, that also bus drivers can do it, employment services, care sector,
Talkback radio producers who answer the phone.
Good point. So I think, but the problem is that our funding model doesn't enable those skill sets. We don't have some kind of skills passport mechanism to track all those sort of skill sets. So I think for me in the next 12 months, it's for us. We've already got 2 projects going with qualification reform. We're looking at how we can just get rid of that snakes and ladders approach of training. If you look at a chef's apprenticeship and then you look at a Asian chef apprenticeship, which you've got to do both if you want to become an Asian chef, 50% of that's duplicated. So how do we get somebody to become a specialist much quicker? So we're actually ripping apart that that current qualification framework for our sectors and looking at how can somebody become a gluten-free patisserie chef. Right. And not do everything else that they don't need to. So I think for us, qualification reform is the number one thing we want to push and continue to push.
And skills for all, not skills for some.
Exactly. Nice. And it's like a lattice work. Everything's more transferable. It solves your RPL issue and, so many benefits.
Same question, if I may, to Cam and then Mark.
I think where we're looking at areas where we've got a failure of the traineeship system, particularly. So if we look at the apprenticeship and traineeship system, we shouldn't see it as the same product and outcome. Different durations, different employment processes, different sectors. So the way I look at it is that we've got to start, obviously in the traineeship space, we've got to start looking at doing that differently. So one of the most valuable lessons I learnt around introducing degree apprenticeships, working with universities, I had to teach them how to put a training plan together, which is very much bread and butter for the apprenticeship and traineeship system, but completely Dutch to higher education. And when I worked through that process, it dawned on me, because they were talking about departure points in higher education where, because of course we won't use the metrics, but the non-completion rates in higher education are phenomenally bad. And when you look at the departure points in higher education, particularly around first year, there's still an outcome perhaps, or at second year there's a graduate certificate or a graduate diploma outcome. So I've started thinking about that from a South Australian context where perhaps we look at a traineeship, a full qualification outcome that has departure points that are skill sets. So we want to start looking at how we would declare that as a commission and what those funded skill sets would look like. So, and if I think about, and I know Paul Walsh is in the room, looks after transport and logistics under ISO and so on, but if I think about what motivates someone to do Certificate 3 in driving operations, licensing motivates someone to do that, and they really only, I think, Paul, 3 units or thereabouts. When I think about some other qualifications, really people are just accessing 3 units out of that qualification and then not completing.
So that's another way of thinking about what you were talking about, which is cherry picking, because you're not dropping out, you're just doing that first year. I mean, universities have started to do that with lower ATARs off the back of a Cert 3, like at Griffith University, you can do the first year of an arts degree and get a diploma of arts, and then you can go on and do the second year, which will become the second year of your arts degree. So that's thinking but that's considered revolutionary, that you would actually put the student at the centre of it to say, how much of this would you like to do? All of it has value.
And then if we're driven by non-completions, with those metrics, every state and territory is kept up at night about non-completion. So if we can just look at that departure point as being a completion, because that individual stays within that industry sector and is working within that industry sector and then can pick up that pathway again, I just think we've got to be a bit smarter around how we determine employability. Employability might not be actually achieving the full qualification in some sectors. But where I will draw the line though is, obviously this thinking doesn't apply to electricians or pilots.
Same to Mark.
And I suppose for me, it's making sure the engagement is at all levels of industry. So I suppose a lot of the time, we hear, you've been consulting with the big companies, we've got Microsoft, etc., that are a part of it, and we've consulted with industry. And I suppose it's just making sure in all the different jurisdictions that it's actually engaging with all those different levels of industry. And I know when I'm going out and meeting with different parts of industry and I'll say, if you talk to the Jobs and Skills Council, and they'll be like, who? And I suppose that's where some JSCs are working very differently to others. For instance, with build skills, they're very embedded in the local community here. And so for a lot of the times, if I'm going to meetings, then I'm meeting with build skills and also our local building and construction industry. So I'd say it's the same for the other areas. And I know with the training package side of things as well, that when we're looking at the list of who's been involved and who's been consulted in the development of that training package, to have that assurance that, you know, all these key people, big and small, have been factored into it is a key part of it, and just makes our job a little bit easier as well to speed things up.
And industry is just hanging for it. Like, if I use a hairdressing example, that package hasn't been updated since 2016. We're doing it right now, but by the time we update it, get it in, do the train-out period, etc., it's like 15 years between drinks. And there's stuff in that package now that is so out of fashion. Like, you know, they're being forced to do chemical straightening, and no hairdresser in Australia does chemical straightening, but they're having to learn that to get their qualifications. So we've been running some workshops with the hairdressing industry. We've had over 5,000 pieces of stakeholder feedback as a result of that. Everyone wants to have a say, but like I said, by the time we get it rolled out, new fashions are going to be coming out. We're not keeping up with consumer trends, and we're going to have to start all over again. So that's why we need qualification reform.
So, Danica, from a federal perspective, 3 ideas. We've talked about engagement and assurance. We've talked about cross-industry, cross-employment skills. We've talked about a more flexible approach to defining what success looks like as we go through a qualifications process. Which of those ideas would you back in terms of the greatest chance of success, the greatest impact, the one that we should be most excited about?
Can I pick all 3?
I knew you were going to say that.
Sorry.
No.
But I think we have to do a lot, right? Like, we have to do lots of different things. It can't just be one idea. We need to, like, this problem, the ability of the skills system to contribute to solving problems, that's economy-wide, that's Australia-wide. It's not just any one thing that's going to tackle that problem, right? The problems. All the easy stuff, I think, has been done.
That's a really great point.
We know what the solutions are to traffic control, right? Like, easy. What we don't know is how we solve long-term, what does Australia look like in 2050? How do we need to get there on economy-wide questions? That's where the Jobs and Skills Councils are really, I think, going to pay dividends and are already. You've got this really important stewardship role with people in this room contributing to the conversation and pulling them in to figure out how we get there and tell us what we need to do. Because they're so massive, the problems, they do require that multifaceted approach, I think, to solving them. And there's no one thing that is in of itself enough, particularly when we think, one of the overarching themes from today, I think, has been that idea about the pace of change. And, Nat just touched on it before with hairdressing and chemical straightening. There's that scene from Legally Blonde, which probably, it doesn't mean anything anymore about perms. But
perms are back. Boys with mullets get perms.
Yeah, you're completely wrong there, Danica.
They want perms in the package.
Perms are a thing.
Okay, you learn something
PK's
new every
embraced the
day.
perm
It's
before.
hard to keep up.
We don't need your contribution, the women are speaking. Yeah.
And I, look, don't tell anybody, I famously cut my own hair, so that's not, I'm the wrong person to have this conversation with. But everything is moving at such pace that if we do just one thing and we choose just one thing, it's not enough. We need to do all of it.
I guess that what I'm dying to know is the extent to which you listen to this and think, I cannot make the system operate at this pace. So when we listen to Cam's idea around departure points, which is a great idea, so instead of having a qual, it's 4 pieces of Lego and you can do it all. Again, doesn't work for everything. You really need a qualified, my son's a sheet metal apprentice, you've got to go all the way through to the end of that.
South Australians would call it Lego, by the way. Just
schools, and when they go to school. So how hard would that be to do? Actually, practically, working within the clunky system that we have, which is the system that we have, let's not be too blue sky about this, but how achievable is that?
So federalism, right? So I can't, and Minister Giles can't, in and of ourselves, himself, make a decision. It has to come from, after listening to industry, peaks, the unions, all of the stakeholder kind of groups, presenting things to the full suite of ministers that we have working in this federated system. So in that respect, challenging, but I think it's fair to say, certainly Minister Giles is open to opportunity and new ways of doing things. And, it's one of the reasons, he touched on this morning, it's one of the reasons the Jobs and Skills Councils were developed and put in place in the first place, to help government get there and develop new ways of working and doing business. I think we're up for the conversation. It's going to be challenging, but it's not just the Commonwealth alone that's able to solve that challenge.
So in other words, because you've got the JSCs, you've got that authority behind the ask, as well as the ideas coming from states and territories and so forth.
Yeah, and that's a really important independent voice for ministers across Australia when they're making decisions.
Yeah. So that, which, accounts for your approach, which is impatience. That's what you're designed to be there for.
100%. I think we are set up to drive outcomes. I'm reflecting on sort of like this narrative, and I said, but I'm a soldier. I'm 30 years a soldier, and the basic principle of soldiering is the overwhelming concentration of force against weakness. And so when I look at this and I look at the problems that we've got to fix, I feel like there are system-wide issues, system-wide problems that we have to sort of get to, and we need to sort of like sequence it. And within the FSO, what we're focused on are like the biggest problems that we can find that will have the greatest impact, and that's where we're going to concentrate our effort. Because the other stuff can sort of follow on, but I feel like, that's how we need to be thinking. And if we can sort of like line up a state government with a JSC and a training provider and the federal government, like, we will be successful if industry comes in behind us. But if we are fragmented, then we're lost. And I suppose that's how we think about it in the FSO.
But also, can I say, and I mean this genuinely, that's the perverse thing about the military, isn't it? It is at once a very focused fighting force and a giant bureaucracy. That's what the military is. It's a giant bureaucracy that can do both things, which is, I think, a great analogy for what we're dealing with. They're public servants, and it's, what's that expression you guys use?
To unshackle the dogs of war, so that they can go away and do what they need to do. And it's maybe not overly dissimilar to what we're talking about here. And Cam, you might want to follow on.
But that's what snafu means within the military, right? Situation, normal, all left up, right? That's what the military talks about. And in a way, that's how we progress, isn't it? It's always like this. It's always a muddle. We muddle along, and then suddenly we look up and we've come from A to B. As we muddle through. That's how it works in this imperfect, messy way. That's how democracies evolve.
I think we've got to stop dancing around the edges and keep updating training packages. That hasn't been working, and I think we've said that a number of times today. We've just got to get on crack and have a go. Give it a go. We can't keep bitching around the water cooler about what's not working. I think the manner, I call it my manifesto. I was on a plane coming home from Perth one night, and I wrote all the things why everyone was going to say no to our qualification reform idea. Industry's loving it, by the way. We get standing ovations at industry conferences when we present the concept. Everyone's like, yes, that's what we want. And I sat there and I wrote a 6-page brain dump of everything that was going to potentially stop it, from award wages, IR, ER, employment contracts, right through the entire system, from federal right down to a corporate, organisation. But we're not going to let us stop. We can't let that stop us. So I'm with you, Cam. I say, let's just give it a crack. Unleash the dogs.
Coming back to the sector that we're talking about finance, IR, and so forth, and tech, IT and tech. Cam and Mark, thinking about that, how do you see the augmentation of the sorts of training that we're going to need to have? Bring us back to the ideas of AI, because in some ways this kind of conversation about how the system's structured and how difficult it is to reform, sometimes necessarily, because Darwin's very different from Hobart, etc., is an evergreen conversation. But then we need to lay over the particular challenges of digital and AI skills. So how do you augment the sort of training that's going on? How do you see that evolving?
I think when I was talking before about the levers that we have, for me it's then about, well, how do I be flexible in how I set up, how we fund different providers in how they can deliver training in different ways. And so there was talk before about, just informal learning, and then there's the place. So VET would play a part in providing formal qualifications, but then outside of that, it's all those other value adds. And so LinkedIn Learning is one of those ones where there's so much value for people to go on and access courses as they need them there. There's the credentialing done through Microsoft and Cisco and all those sorts of things. So I think it's trying to look at it holistically to say, going back to the learner, instead of it just being, you're in that stream and everything else, it's about how do we provide that flexibility so learners can bounce around between the different things that they have on option. And that, so whether that's higher ed, whether it's VET, whether it's all these other sort of accredited or non-accredited pathways, it's how do we value that, and as government, how do we look at ways in and how we can fund that and actually make it so it's a valuable option for people to take.
I agree with Mark, and I think it would be 15 years ago now, I think in the electrical trade, so electrical apprentices switched to e-profiling. So digitisation's been with us for quite some time, and in a very industrially locked trade training space as well for electricians. So I think we've already proven many years ago that the training system can adapt to move, in that instance, from job cards to mobile devices and actually recording the work you do to help you get a licence, and a qualification. So I think I see AI evolving the system that way. If I look at the apprenticeship system, it will be embraced. Just a quick side note, we've just finished judging the South Australian Training Awards, and I tell you, for the 38 applicants for the South Australian Apprentice of the Year, a lot of their applications looked the same. They did look like they'd gone through Copilot. A lot of similar adjectives. The verbiage was about the same. So apprentices
They just needed better prompts.
Well,
make sure this
they've
doesn't
clearly
look like
adapted.
anybody
Is
else's.
what I'm saying. But I think AI in the core critical skill shortage space shouldn't be seen as a threat at all. It's about working smarter and enabling apprentices and then qualified tradespeople to be able to work more effectively. And in South Australia, we've pioneered and embraced the dual trade model too. So we're putting two trades together over a 5-year apprenticeship pathway to make individuals far more qualified, and particularly when we're working with major employers like Santos and so on, who want remote workers that can do more than one trade area. So I see AI helping in that process and scheduling, in accessing technical information instantly, rather than dragging 32 tonnes of Australian standards with you out into the field. And then in the traineeship space, I just think that we do, particularly in the sectors that PK looks after, I think we do have to work differently and think about what enables that employment relationship a bit better, and think about those departure points again, where the aim of the game is to get into the workplace quicker. The thing that makes Certificate 3, the ICT certificates, valuable from my experience is the fact that you get the Microsoft and Cisco certification. That's the thing that actually gives you the employability, not so much the other competencies, communicate effectively in the workplace. I've never actually seen an ICT consultant communicate effectively in the workplace, by the way. But I mean, I don't wish to cause offence.
I think that's how that sentence was going to end, yes. But we're also reliant on them that we just put up with it. Eve Olorenshaw asked the question, loving the discussion about exit points and awards for VET, but rather than start at the end point and break things down, why not start with a suite of building blocks that a learner or an employer can stack into a qualification? This allows more than one journey to a qualification outcome. I think that is your point, Natalie, isn't it? Sure, great idea, but that's not how the system's set up right now.
It's we're calling it changing it from a ladder to a lattice work, and if you look at across all our service industries, those service skills are the same, whether you're going into a hairdressing salon or going into a retail or a hospitality. Employability skills are all the same, things like that. But I think that specialisation pathway that enables you to then jump between different.
These are not new ideas. I mean,
No.
this is how generalist degrees have
Absolutely.
worked forever in
The
universities.
system hasn't enabled us to do it.
Yeah.
It's always been a nice to have, and we're at that stage now where we're saying no, it's a have to have. Otherwise, we're going to be too slow.
There's a question here from Amanda Linton, Institute of Certified Bookkeepers, who I think we're hearing from in the next panel. Employers and industry associations are frustrated by separate administration points for each state, particularly apprenticeships and traineeships. What are the panel's thoughts on cross-border collaboration to streamline and shorten timeframes and reduce red tape around traineeships and apprenticeships?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
It's a conversation I know we're having. We're an island in the middle of New South Wales. So we do have an MOU, cross-border MOU with New South Wales, and we're currently working with them at the moment about some of those issues.
Yeah, and you could do that federation-wide.
Well, we're piloting it, surprise, in South Australia. So we've announced the Industry Accelerated Apprenticeship Pilot. We've got 7 trade areas, including commercial cookery, carpentry. We've even included fabrication and mechanical fitting. So we've taken a year off that. So we've done all the industrial work too. So I guess this is the point around, again, how the Federation works and how we feed this information back up. So it's well known across Senior Skills Officials Network and SWIMCO, the State and Territory Ministerial Council, that we're doing this stuff. Much like Canberra, sometimes we do feel like, as a small jurisdiction, we feel that perhaps sometimes because we're not a large jurisdiction, then perhaps the thought is that it won't work in other large states, particularly on the eastern seaboard. Obviously, we don't think that's the case. And if we do the industrial work for apprenticeships and traineeships, we should probably only do it once, is my view. So we're very open to it.
Can I just dive into that a little bit more? So the importance of the cross-state collaboration is absolutely fundamental. Is it working? What more could be done to improve that? Not quite sure where to go to on that one. I might go to you, Danica. What's your perspective?
Look, I think it is. I know I've only been in the space for a short amount of time, but I'm already seeing like an advance on the conversations that we've been having. They're more and more productive each time we sit down. There's more and more, just like the conversation today, where we were sort of all sharing state secrets and about how things are working on the ground for each of you. That collaboration and the idea sharing is also happening in increasing levels within the states and territories. And I've done state and territory work like the entire time of my career, and this is the first time I've really seen it be a true partnership and collaboration, which is
Right.
sadly not saying very much. Maybe I don't know. We have
Saying something.
Yeah, well, it's certainly saying something. I think it is a really positive relationship and something you don't always see everywhere, and everybody wants the best for the system.
But also, can I just sort of point out that I live in Queensland, where we don't have winters like this. And
This is not even cold. Like, this
I'm
is
freezing.
balmy.
Yeah, I'm absolutely freezing. And we are the most disaster-prone state, and every time we have a natural disaster, all of the building commissions and various accreditation organisations and commissions within the state have to accredit all the builders and plumbers and everything else that we need to come rebuild the state on a regular basis, whether they're coming from New South Wales or New Zealand. And when you ask the question, this isn't a Commonwealth problem, this is an us problem, could we not just solve this problem, get the mini muffins outside and just get on with this, shall we? Because surely a New South Wales accredited carpenter or electrician or whatever is kind of the same. There's no particular Queensland flavour to that. And I do
They are
wonder
the same.
sometimes...
It's the same qualification.
Yeah.
It's the same capstone assessment.
Yeah.
You're onto something, Ellen.
It's very easy to say, why doesn't Canberra? But at the same time, gee, there's an awful lot the states could do before they even sat down in what we used to call a COAG environment to get their own houses in order. What's the stuff we can do really quickly? And that to me is so obvious. The Insurance Council of Australia, it just drives them balmy, because a lot of times the insurers are the people who want to say to the entire skilled population of Western Australia, can you come to Queensland for 12 weeks? We need to sort this out. And the answer is, oh, that'll take a bit of time, sorry. You got the form?
Is there only one form? Surely there's multiple.
There's more than one form. Yeah. I can't get the answer. Every week I ring and they go, it's you again. Anyway, some questions coming through. General questions about remaking the Federation. No national discussion would be complete without them. Craig Robertson says, let's cede VET. Could we not cede VET to the Commonwealth? Would you like it?
I'll take that on notice.
Yeah.
Look, I think the system only works though. Like, Canberra can sit in an ivory tower down the road and dictate for the country, and on some stuff that works. On this, I don't think it works.
Yep, I agree. There's a reason
That's just my personal view.
yeah,
But, you know.
you'd have to agree, wouldn't you,
Oh,
folks?
completely.
Surprise,
And
yeah.
I'm glad you went first. Yeah, and I think it goes back to economic priorities and drivers for each
Yes.
state and territory.
Exactly.
Different
You know,
industries.
Form F doesn't work for everyone, and I think that's part of the training package issue as well, because we are trying to compromise on the mining standard, or again, I think just on the electricians piece, there is a Commonwealth project that's been commenced around sacrificing that sacred cow. So that process is underway.
The electrons are pretty much the same across state lines.
Well, yeah, and it's
Yeah.
the same voltage too.
Yeah,
and
right,
I mean, different generation, of course. I won't go into how much solar we've got in SA, but it's more than everywhere else.
That's it.
So, but if you think about that licensing piece, and thankfully I'm not the Commissioner for Consumer and Business Services in South Australia, but I often wondered if that was not around revenue
Yes,
as well.
Yes, it's a couple of hundred sometimes.
Yeah, and some of us
1,000 or so.
some of us have cross-border commissioners too who are actively now working on this piece as well, because it is quite acute in border towns. So for South Australia, for instance, Mount Gambier, Portland, and so on, and then a couple of other points, Cameron's Corner, going further north from where you're from. But I just think that we're not blind to it, and we are doing something about it. But the problem is we're on another process, right? We're on another reform journey. So, and we've been on these journeys before.
There's another question here that's coming up, Natalie, around... I'm not sure I agree with the premise of the question, but here it is. Given the speed at which non-vet training providers adapt to emerging industry needs, should the vet sector consider large-scale collaboration with them to accelerate curriculum updates and strengthen industry partnerships? Is there something to that?
Someone's got to pay for it, but yes, potentially. And I think there's more and more partnerships with industry and the training sector. I mean, TAFE's a great example of that. I think the innovation's got to come from industry. I mean, they're the experts. They know what they want and need. So I think there's an opportunity there, but it's how do you pay for it? And
And I just add to that, I mean, the system at the moment is set up to be fragmented. So individual RTOs are there responsible for generating their own sort of training resources. Like, why would we do that? For stuff that is like common across the board, why aren't we generating national resources, making those resources available, allowing them then to contextualise them to their local environments? Like, there are smarter ways of doing business that would enable us to make the most of the money that's in there. And at the moment, it's the fragmentation is the fundamental challenge that has to be overcome.
And the more we change, the more it costs the RTOs and the TAFEs as well too. And I think that's one of the risks that I'm sort of looking at the moment, and I'm sure a lot of people in the room are, that the Jobs and Skills Councils are impatient, and we're cracking on and we're trying to help industry in updating all these things. But there's going to be a flurry of training packages being updated, and that's going to have a massive flow-on effect on the training and education sector.
Okay, so before I let you all go, I just want you to refocus on what we were supposed to do, which is what's next and what are the priorities? Make your brain hurt and answer that one, Mark. Is it consolidation from your point of view?
I think so. As I said, there's so much going on at the moment. It's trying to make sure that everyone can actually deliver on all the things that have already set out. But, there's been some key points today about piloting. And
Yes.
so, the Jobs and Skills Councils, when they were doing the qualification reform work, a lot of them went away and did different pilots on different activities, and there were a lot of lessons learnt from that. And so I think there's a really good outcome from that, in that, let's do some more of that piloting work, so then we can keep progressing with these changes and solidify them. But it's also just supporting the vet sector, small and large RTOs, in actually getting through all this change that's happening over the next couple of years.
Okay.
If I have an employer in South Australia that wants to trial a product that Natalie or PK and their organisations create, so they want to employ an apprentice or trainee, then my honest view is I should be able to pilot that within my jurisdiction. So I should, as Commissioner, I should be able to declare that as an apprenticeship or traineeship, that product, and not wait for the national endorsement process.
What would you need to achieve that?
A continuation of a conversation that started around the ministerial table. So I think we do need to work out if some states and territories are prepared to be first mover, then we should be enabled in the system to be able to do that as well. Because at the moment, South Australia referred its accreditation powers to the Commonwealth back in 2011 when ASQA was created. So we don't have the benefit that Victoria and Western Australia have to accredit our own qualifications. I too was part of the ASQA pilot, by the way, that was mentioned today by Bendigo Kangan. So we've tested a process that's worked for us. But I wonder whether or not it's just a bit smarter to try and go with the approach that I've proffered today, rather than encourage all states and territories to go back to self-accreditation.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Priorities, Natalie, I'm thinking of the 6-page dossier that you wrote on the way back from Perth.
I think I'd probably want to bring it right up to the top of the topical thing right now, which is the Economic Reform Roundtable. Yep. It's been mentioned a few times today. People, I believe anyway, and I know a lot of people in this room here, the people and their skills are going to be our number one enabler for productivity. So if we can get people at the top of that list, and Barney's not here, but we're all, we're hanging on what you say there, Barney, because we need to invest. Everything we've talked about today is going to take investment, and if it's not a key priority of the government to invest in our training and skills sector, it won't happen. So that would be for me.
Stole my talking points. That's exactly what I was going to say. I think the conversation next week is a really important opportunity, or the maybe combination of some opportunities, and it's important, I think, that we in this room are prepared to leverage that as it's presented, because the skills and training system is the lever, the solution, whatever sort of framing you want to put around it, to a bunch of the challenges that we have across the economy. And there's the opportunity. The system is slow, the system is clunky. We've heard that today, absolutely. But there is opportunity within that system to do things a bit differently and to leverage the opportunities. So let's crack on.
And I think it is about that reframing, isn't it, PK? Because it seems to me from, I know a little bit about a lot of things and not a lot about any one thing, but the pattern that I sort of see is everything in Australia at the moment comes back to housing, right? Whether you're trying to employ people in central Queensland and there isn't a house there, tourism industry, you're nodding away, right? Housing and skills. That's the priority. If your conversation isn't coming back to one of those two subjects every few minutes, you've drifted off.
And even the housing conversation comes back to skills, right?
Right.
Do we have the skills to build a house?
That's it. It's round and round it goes.
And so my one thing will be accelerate the accelerator, which is focused on outcomes, and follow where the energy takes you. A bit of feng shui, like if it's not working, then we'll go somewhere else. But keep going, keep driving forwards, but accelerate the accelerator.
Yes, very good. Please thank this panel very much. That was wonderful.